All right, JoeyRitter.com, on Twitter at Joey Ritter. My guest today spent 17 years in the National Hockey League. He always came up gigantic when the games mattered most, and he's easily the most likable person to put on the orange and black in the last 20 years. His name is Danny Briere. Danny, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Hi, Joey. Thanks for having me.
Great. So I know that you've done the podcast circuit, the Zoom interviews ad nauseum lately. Actually, my original idea for this interview was to get you on and actually not ask one hockey-related question, but I quickly determined that that was not a great idea. So we'll try to go a different way with this. But I want to start off and talk about your French-Canadian heritage, because honestly, I know very little about it. I've lived in the Philly region my entire life. You live here, so you know kind of both ways of life. If I uprooted my family and moved to Gatineau, Quebec, would it be a big culture shock, or is it just like any American city with French speaking?
I mean, we're close to Ottawa. So I grew up, 5 minutes from downtown Ottawa. But it's funny, the culture shock from when you cross the river onto the Quebec side, where it becomes, 90% French, where Ottawa, I would say, is probably about 50-50, maybe a little bit more English. But it's a little bit of a culture shock when you cross the river and you go to the French side. And even myself, no, I didn't speak much English until I turned pro when I was 19 years old with Springfield.
Really? Yeah, that was my next question. Are you learning both English and French as a kid? But it sounds like hockey is kind of what forced you to learn English, and it wasn't until 19?
I was growing up. I didn't need English. And I was a little stubborn, saying, "Well, I'm never going to need English in my life, so I don't need to pay attention in school." Until I finally turned pro and had to move to the U.S., and that's when I realized how important it was. So I was very fortunate. The Phoenix Coyotes signed a player by the name of Martin Samard. At the time, he was a veteran, had played in the AHL for a lot of years. They sat him near me in the dressing room to help me out, and that's how I kind of learned with his help. Luckily, too, is a lot of the words, the hockey terms are the same in French and English. So I was able to get by that way and figure out how to make sentences.
Right.
And that's kind of, that's how I learned the language. At first, it was pretty funny because I took everything literally. I didn't understand the jokes. I didn't understand the expressions. There's still some that I struggle with, but I'm getting more and more comfortable every day with the language.
That surprises me that you learned English so late, because I feel like you speak better English than people have English their entire
Well, thank you for saying that.
Is there a specific food that the area is known for in Quebec, or?
Well, poutines. I don't know if you've ever heard of poutines, but they're French fries with cheese curds and gravy. Not the healthiest snack, but
good, though.
Definitely what we're known for, I would say.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to travel to Toronto for work and got to take some personal time, check out the Hall of Fame, and I definitely had poutine when I was there for sure.
Good.
One thing I never quite understood in the 80s growing up when the Quebec Nordiques were in the league, did you grow up a Canadiens fan?
I did. It was a big rivalry.
If you had the Montreal Canadiens, I don't know, why would you ever be a Nordiques fan? Like, was it a regional thing, or how did that whole fan base work?
Yeah, you were one or the other. I think most of the people in the Montreal region were Montreal Canadiens fan. Most of the people in the Quebec region, Quebec City region, were probably Nordiques fan. Where we were closer to Ottawa, and at the time growing up, there was no Ottawa Senators. If you were on the Quebec side, you kind of had your pick, and a lot of my friends in school, it was pretty much half and half between Montreal and the Nordiques. So it was pretty intense. A lot of good rivalries. I remember growing up with all the playoff stories and the fighting between the two teams. It was very, very intense.
It had to be great. I mean, the Canadiens were winning the cup in '93, right when you were kind of that high school age. So that had to be great time.
Yeah, I remember '86 very well. I was 9 years old. And in 93 as well. 93, I was just making, my switch to major junior. I was a little older. I was starting to contemplate maybe, making a career out of it. It was pretty cool. But I think I probably enjoyed 86 a little bit more when Patrick Roy came aboard. That's when I really started loving the game and getting into it more and more.
Awesome. So speaking of that kind of high school time frame, you really graduated at a time, in my opinion, where, music was there was a lot of great music out. Were you a music fan back then? Did you have your favorite bands that you listened to, or?
There's some. I can't say I was a huge music fan. Obviously, there's a few singers that I'm a big fan of in Quebec. The Counting Crows was one band that I really liked, that I probably enjoy a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's probably like 93, so that was a great album, great time. Now, Danny, you haven't aged since the mid 2000s. So let's say Men's Health magazine approached you and asked you for like your top 5 secrets to not aging. What are some of the things that might make that list?
I would say play hockey, stay in the cold. It's good for the skin. I can't take credit for it. I don't know why. I know a lot of people tell me that I still look very young. But other than playing hockey, keeping my face fresh, other than the cuts from sticks and pucks, I can't. I haven't done much. It's
really,
I've just been fortunate.
So post hockey, there's no like lotions or creams that you're using, or nothing like that.
Not really. I mean, maybe that's the trick, right? Leaving it alone.
Right. Well, I'll have to try it. So, getting to hockey, is it fair to call you a pioneer of the modern game, in the sense that how you overcame the odds with your size, and really that favors today's game for sure? Or was it, inevitable that it was heading in that direction, or did guys like you really pave the way for it?
That's a good question. I mean, there were guys for me that kind of, trailblazed that path. Growing up, I used to look up to guys like Matt Snaslin and Pat LaFontaine. There were 2 guys that I really looked up to, along with Wayne Gretzky. All 3 of those guys were kind of on the smaller side. When I was coming up, I think Marty St. Louis and Steve Sullivan were 2 guys on the smaller side that I kind of followed and just trying to emulate and follow their track. Obviously, the rules nowadays make it more favorable for smaller players, and I think you need more of those guys in your lineup, or you can afford to have more and then still be competitive. You look back 20 years ago, most teams had 1, maybe 2 at the most on the smaller side. So you didn't see that a lot back then. When I started with the Coyotes, they had Cliff Ronning. So to bring me aboard, it was kind of risky to have 2 smaller centermen in the lineup. So that's how teams, I think, prepared or based their lineup around. You needed size back then, just because speed wasn't as important as it is in the game today.
Right. Well, speaking of the Coyotes and the years that you've played, we're going to bring back a game that usually is reserved for our music guests, but I have a bucket of index cards that represents every year you played, and we're just going to pick one out at random, open it up, and just
all right.
Tell me the first thing that comes to your head.
Okay.
No need for a long story, just the first thing that comes to your head. Okay, this is a good one. Age 28, 2005, 2006, Buffalo Sabres, 58 points that year. You go to the Eastern Conference Finals against Carolina.
I mean, Stanley Cup. I'm still convinced that we had the best team left out of the last 4 standing. We lost in Game 7 against Carolina that year. We were so close. We were losing a defenseman, it felt, every single night. Just unfortunate. And I realized, especially that year, you need to have a good team to win the Stanley Cup, but you need also luck on your side. You need matchups to go your way. And it just wasn't our year. And Carolina had a great team, but they certainly got some breaks, and they used them well, I guess. So that's one year that I look back and said I was so close to the Stanley Cup.
I don't know if it was this same year, but I know one year you smoked the Flyers in the first round, and it was like every time you touched the puck, my heart would sink with fear. And that's.
So I believe that was the year, because we ended up playing the Flyers in the first round, and it's the one team we didn't want to play. It's the one team we were afraid of, that we didn't want to start with. And I still remember that game one. That's when we realized, well, maybe the hockey gods are on our side. Peter Forsberg had a chance all alone in front of the net early in the first period, and Henrik Talander made a save with the shaft of his stick, and the puck went wide. And I was sitting on the bench thinking, wow, this might be something in happening here, and maybe an upset. And we had the big hit when Brian Campbell hit RJ Umberger in the middle of the ice. That was game one.
Oh, yes, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and then and we won that game one in double overtime. So that kind of gave us some hope that we could beat the Flyers. But going into the series, we were not very confident.
Wow, okay. So one thing that I'm extremely curious about, I believe it was the 2011 year where HBO did the 24/7 series. How were you with that? Did that, did that annoy you? Did you embrace it? Was there anything you can tell me about that experience?
It's fun. It's fun today, looking back and having all those memories, and to look back at the tapes, and it brings back memories. And I'm glad we went through it. But at the time, I'm not someone that's super comfortable having a camera following me all over the place. I like to stay private for the most part. And, it was tough to do that, obviously, with the cameras everywhere in the locker room. I feel the locker room is the one place where, it's just you and your teammates, and there's no rules. You can do whatever you want, say whatever you want. But, with the cameras, it was a little tougher. But looking back now, it was great to be able to look back at those memories.
Well, how much were the cameras actually on you? Did they film, you at your house? Was it just the locker room stuff, or,
At the rink, they had cameras set up that were working constantly. Other than the showers and the bathrooms, they were allowed to go wherever they wanted. And there was some still fixtures that were there in the dressing room, for example, that were there every day, not moving. If they wanted to film you outside of the rink, they had to ask to come into your room, and you had the rights to say no. And I think that year they came to visit us, me and my three boys, and we had Sean Couturier, I believe, that year with the HBO series. Right.
So before Sean Couturier roomed with you, Claude Giroux, you were kind enough to let him stay with you in his rookie time. I imagine he was very respectful and a fine roommate, but surely, he left his ice cream bowl out in the middle of the night, or maybe didn't clean up his beard trimmings in the sink. Did you ever have to lay down the landlord smackdown to Claude?
Not much. He was great. We had a lot of fun together. What can I say about Claude? Maybe he was a little messy in his room, but he kept it in his room. He used to tease me that I wasn't a very good cook, but other than grilled cheese, he didn't make much himself either. But we had a great time. And I hear people saying it was great for Danny to mentor those guys, but to be honest with you, they were just as great for me. I was going through a tough time in my personal life at the time, and to have him, Claude, and Sean around, they kept me closer to the younger group of guys that were coming around. They gave me that chance to get closer to a lot of my teammates. Have maybe closer relationships with the younger guys, and gave me that love of the game, that youthful excitedness again at going to the rink. So I owe them a lot of credit too for, those few years that I had them in the house with me.
That's huge. So I know that you probably have been asked this before, but it might be tough to narrow it down to one. But is there a specific player that comes to mind that you feel you really had some tremendous chemistry with? You always knew where each other was on the ice, and you just always had success with this particular player?
I've been fortunate to have those with different guys. So when I think about Phoenix with Shane Doan, we had that chemistry. With Shane, it was more of he would go in first, bounce people off the puck, and I would just come in and pick it up, and he would trailblaze the way to the net, and I would try to take it behind him. When I was in Phoenix, when I moved to Buffalo, I was very fortunate right away when I got there to find chemistry with JP Dumont and Jochen Hecht. We had a line where for a few years we played together almost every single game until JP left, and that was a lot of fun. And JP still one of my closer friends to this day. So it was fun to have that. That last year in Buffalo, he left for Nashville, and Jason Pominville replaced him. That's when I had probably my personal best points-wise in a regular season with Jason. So it kept going. The chemistry kept going with Jason Pominville, who's a tremendous player as well. And when I came to Philly, it took a little bit of time to find that chemistry. I bounced around with a lot of different lines. Early on, I had the injuries as well, the groin surgeries. But the 2010 playoffs, when Peter Laviolette one day inserted Scott Hartnell and Ville Leno on each side.
Oh my God.
That took off, and that was very special. Those 2 years playing with those two guys were awesome. Some of the best in my life. And that 2010 playoff run, obviously playing with those two guys was amazing. I still, when I think about that line, I think we made each other better as teammates. And I know, Scotty went on and he got to play with Giroux and Yager a couple of years later, and that line was clicking as well. But I really think that all three of us together, we made each other better. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember just Ville Leno, the whole playoffs, he would just charge from one end to the other. Like, he just was so reliable getting the puck in the zone. And yeah, that was such a fun line to watch for sure. So speaking of playoffs, obviously, you've had tremendous playoff success. My question isn't necessarily on the player side. It's on the coaching side. There's a term that fans use often, and I don't think they really know what they're talking about when they say it, and myself included. It's about this notion of coaches that make adjustments in the playoffs. They say, oh, well, that team lost because the coach didn't make adjustments. And, I don't think anybody really knows what those adjustments are. Can you talk about maybe some of those key adjustments that coaches have made in the playoffs, and maybe a specific example of a coach you played for that was good at that?
Yes, that's a really good question, honestly, and that's pretty deep into the hockey system-wise. Sometimes it's just a certain team playing a certain way or a certain system that you need to change, and you need to adjust a few certain things. I remember in 2010, for example, with Peter Laviolette, we had a team. We had to, first round of the playoffs. So the first 3 rounds, we ended up playing more of a trap team. When you think about the Devils, the Canadiens, and the Bruins, they were trap teams. And Peter was really good at adjusting, making adjustment to not give them the chance to trap us in certain areas of the ice. And they all trapped at different areas. So the Devils were trapping right in the neutral zone. The Montreal Canadiens were a little more aggressive. They try to trap you coming out of your zone. So, just making those adjustments, how you're moving the puck up the ice and not being trapped in those areas for turnover. So Peter was really good at that. Another adjustment, I remember when we played the Bruins, they tried to have Zdeno Chara play against Richard's line and my line because he was playing, 30, 35 minutes a night. They figured he could probably play against two different lines. And there's some games early in the series where, Richards would go, then he would go with Giroux's line, and then I would go, and then our fourth line would go before coming back to Richards. And that gave Chara to be on the ice every time myself or Mike Richards would go on the ice. And I remember approaching Lavi and asking him, I say, hey, from now on, can you have me and Mike Richards go back to back? So that way it makes it tougher on Chara. If he wants to play against us, he has to stay on the ice for 2 minutes straight.
Right.
And in the second minute, we might be able to take advantage of him. So that's an adjustment, or that's an example of a coach making an adjustment, because matchups are extremely important. And coaches, for the most part, are in charge of that, the way they manage their bench. So Lavi was excellent at that, just as Lindy Ruff was when I was in Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, it's you got to have deep lines in the playoffs, because there's nothing more frustrating than when you have one line that's always clicking and doing great things, and they just sick all their best players on that one line, and then it's like usually that's you're ousted after that. So Danny, let's shift to what you're doing with the Maine Mariners. I'm interested in hearing about your position there. You're the VP of Operations. If I was on LinkedIn.com and I saw a job description for the VP of Operations, what would be on that?
Well, the cool thing is I get to be involved on both sides, on the business side and on the hockey side. So with the Flyers, they're giving me the chance to learn the business side. And that means, how do we sell tickets? How do we handle our social media? How do we handle our marketing? So all these things, that maybe I wasn't super comfortable when I started. Not that I'm super comfortable now, but I'm getting, I think, better at it, understanding better. So I'm in charge of that with the Mariners, overseeing the finances. Like I said, marketing, ticket sales, corporate sales, as well, corporate partnerships. And then I also oversee the hockey department, which is, my passion, my background, what I know, what I feel comfortable. I get to, talk with the coach. I also act as the general manager. So the trades, the player transactions, overseeing the salary cap on a daily basis. So that's, it's a lot of fun. I'm having a blast. I don't know that you can handle one person can do all of that, at the major, for example, at the NHL level. But we have a smaller staff. We need people to do many, many jobs in our front office, and it's the same thing with me. So I'm having a blast. I'm trying to take it all in as much as I can, because I don't know how long it's going to last.
Well, as far as the marketing goes, I'm just trying to put this together. Are you sitting in the meetings where they're saying, okay, what's the plan? How are we going to sell more tickets? Are you in those brainstorming sessions, or is the marketing people just coming to you to sign purchase orders and, approve the finance?
Well, we have discussions. We'll have talks. Obviously, I rely on them a lot because, that's their background. That's what they know. I'm learning, but at the end of the day, I have to give them my approval. So usually they'll brainstorm, they'll bring me the ideas, and then we'll sit down and talk about the ones that make sense and come up with what we're moving forward with. One thing that was super cool that I had a blast with was when the team started, we had to find a name for the team, colors, and a logo. So to be involved with that, that's kind of marketing as well. To be involved with all that, putting my own little touch to the name, the logo, the colors was really cool as well.
That's fun. Yeah, I hope you're having a good time with that. So, Danny, we're going to wrap this up and let you go. But one final question: you've got 3 boys. Well, I guess men now.
Yeah.
I have 1 boy. This seems really difficult, right? I could barely handle 1. You have 3. That seems very hard.
I had my tough times, believe me.
I'm sure they differ in personalities for sure. But
yeah.
As a father, is there one value or lesson that you really try to instill in them as they transition to adulthood?
Man, there's a lot that I try to instill. Not always easy. I believe in loyalty. I want them to respect people and work hard. That's what I trying to instill in them, and do something that they love. They're still all involved in hockey, which is really cool as a dad to see that. But for example, my youngest son, stopped and didn't play for a couple of years. It wasn't easy to take, but I never showed it to him, and I let him make his own decision. But now that he's back involved in hockey, I'm really excited about that.
Well, you'd think the odds, you maybe have 2 hockey players and then one's, an art major, and
he was trying to do that. I think he got into motorcycles and stuff like that, but now he's back into hockey, and he's actually our video coordinator for the Maine Mariners, because he goes to school up in Portland, Maine. And we had lost our video coordinator, so our head coach invited him, and he started helping us out, and now he's loving it again. So it's pretty cool to see.
That's a great experience. Well, Danny, like I said, I can't thank you enough for doing this interview. I'm going to sound like a total fanboy, but, both my wife and I, when we go down to the Wells Fargo Center, one of us is always repping the 48. So
awesome.
Wish you, your family, and the Maine Mariners success in the coming years. Danny, thanks again for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joey. Thanks for having me. It was a blast.